Hi, it's Lauren and welcome to another Whimsy Stamps video. We are going to be making this slimline card using some new products from Whimsy Stamps right after this. We're going to be using the new Enchanted Kingdom background printed paper, some green cardstock, as well as our Slimline Meadow die. We have our Princess Dragon set, and I'm also going to be using these detail die cuts from the Meadow die set as well. We're going to start by cutting our green cardstock. I am just using the frame from the Meadow die set, and I'm centering it down to a piece of cardstock that I trimmed to be almost the same size as my die, and I'm just using some repositional tape to help hold that in place. So I didn't use the window because I want to make sure that my window covers just enough for my background paper. It would have been a little too big of a window, so I'm using my pattern paper as a guide to where I need to cut the bushes part of my meadow set to make sure that my pattern paper will fit perfectly on that kind of window part of the die. So I'm going to trim down, just kind of creating another bush on the edges here, so that way my meadow bushes look seamless to the edge of my die cut. So I'm just using some paper snips and just kind of following that same kind of pattern as the bushes in the die set. And now you can see that we have our grassy part of our background. So now I need to work on the top part, and I want to keep that dashed line in the design of the die throughout my whole card. So I am just placing it onto my pattern paper. I'm going to trim it down and run it through my die cut machine. And so now you can see that it will fit perfectly on the center of my card base. I have my printed paper there on the top, and then my green cardstock with my bushes from the Meadow die on the bottom, and it fits very nicely on this Kraft cardstock. Now I like to distress my meadow and give it some dimension because there are these die cuts in this part. You can see there's little kind of bushes or hills, and to make them look a little more like they have a little more depth, I'm going to use my Distress Oxide in Rustic Wilderness and a scrap piece of paper to add some distress behind the die cut. So it looks like my die cut bush, like it's going to be in front of the one behind it, giving it some depth, giving it some shadow, so that way there is more of a 3D look to this card. So I'm going to repeat this for all three of these bush die cuts, and as you can see, it adds a little bit of shadow behind them. And I'm going to continue distressing along the edges and the tops of my bushes here just to really complete the distressed look of this pattern paper. Now I'm going to bring out my splatter box because I like splattering on my cardstock. I'm going to use that same Distress Oxide and just kind of sploosh it onto my clear block here and spray some water on it, and then use a paintbrush to splatter on some of that distress ink. I'm going to use a towel to pick up my blobs of water, and then I'm going to also bring out some watercolor, some metallic watercolors. I have one in kind of a sage green, and I wet that with my spritzer and then use that same paintbrush to pick it up and splatter onto my cardstock. I'm going to use my towel again to pick up the excess water, and now I have a pretty distressed and splattered piece of cardstock. I'm going to start taking a look at how I'm going to assemble my card. So I'm going to bring my card base back as well as my printed paper and my meadow, and I'm going to put on some adhesive to my printed paper sky, and I'm going to adhere that to the top center of my card base. And then I want to pop up my meadow, so I am going to layer that on. But before I do, I want to figure out how I'm going to place my dragon. I don't know behind which little bushy hill I'm going to do, so I play with this for a little while and I decide to use the middle bush as where she's going to be on my card. So before I continue, I wanted to get my image colored. I'm going to kind of fast forward through a lot of this, but just wanted to show you that I'm using dark reds for my kind of brick roof here of my tower. I'm going to bring out my brown grays to color in the stone of the tower. I wanted the actual tower to be darker shades, so I'm going to use some of my darker shades. And then the individual stones, I'm going to use the same brown grays, but more of the lighter shades as well as the little windowsill that she is leaning out of. I really love that you can totally personalize your little castle tower and choose different colors. I could have gone a really bright direction with this, maybe like a turquoise and purple tower, but I thought I would keep my tower looking a little more traditional, so I went with brick and brown gray colors. For the inside of my tower, I want it to look like there is a glowing light behind her, so I am going to be using my golden yellows and adding in yellow into that window, as well as a bit of the tower kind of edge. You can see I add a little bit of yellow on the inside. And because I'm going to tuck this into my grassy meadow, I wanted to color the bottom of my image in green, so I'm using 2 shades to try to reach that same green cardstock color. For the rim of my roof, I am using just some brown, and then I go back and forth on how I want to color the top of my tower, so I'm going to skip it for now and move on to my dragon. Now, I did really want to include some bright colors, so I decided to use my purple or my pink violets, my PVs, to color in my dragon. So I start with my light shade, I bring in a medium to add in a little bit of shadow, and then a darker shade to add in some really definite lines. And then I'm going to bring back in that light one and really just blend everything out and make sure she's colored in nicely. And then I thought it would be fun to pair the purple with some teal blue. So I'm bringing out my BT colors and I'm coloring in her eyelids and her tail. And then I'm also going to color in the horns of this same BT kind of teal blue colors. For the eyes, I'm just using a really pale blue to bring a little bit of color to the whites of her eyes. And then I thought, you know, our pretty princess needs a pink little hat. So I am just using different magenta shades and PP pink shades to color in her hat. So I'm just, again, I start with my lighter color, bring in a medium tone, and then a light tone to really just blend everything back together. So I'm finally going to settle on what I'm going to color the top of my tower, and I think, you know what, I think it needs just a shiny gold tower. So I'm going to bring out those same colors that I used for the inside of my tower to create that light, and I'm going to color the top of my tower gold. So again, I start with my lightest shade. I'm just layering down a nice layer and then putting in my mediums to add some shadow as well as the darkest, and then my light one to blend it all out. And now I'm finally done coloring. I'm going to finish putting my card together. So I'm using some foam tape behind my green meadow and I'm going to apply that to the bottom center of my card. I like that this die leaves a nice little border so you can still see that Kraft cardstock around the edge of my die cut pieces. I'm going to add some adhesive strips again, or some foam adhesive strips behind my dragon, and I'm going to tuck it inside behind that second little hill and then adhere her right onto my card base. I'm going to make sure my card has a nice crisp seam, and then I'm going to bring out these die cuts from the Slimline Meadow, and I'm going to cut everything out except for the rabbits. And I went ahead and used some alcohol markers to color them in, and my bushes are actually using that same Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide. But everything else I used my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers and adhered my little tulips together, as well as these cute orange flowers on the bushes. So now I'm going to figure out where they're all going to go. So I'm going to use my jewel picker and just kind of roughly place everything where I think I want them to go. I like my little scene here, so now I'm going to use my wet glue and start adhering them all on. I do change it up a little bit. I move some of the mushrooms around, but ultimately everything kind of stays in the same place. I really like doing a dry run of where I'm going to place my extra little add-ons on my card, and then I will then use glue to glue them down. I noticed I had a little bit of adhesive stuck to my sky, so I'm just using an eraser to pull that up, but being very gentle that I don't remove any of the color from my printed paper. So now I have a sentiment, "May your day be magical." I stamped it out onto a quick strip, and I'm just deciding where I want it to go. I decided that I want it to be kind of popped up here with my flowers and mushrooms, so I'm just going to use a strip of foam adhesive, place that down, and then put my sentiment strip on top. And that is the final card. I hope you enjoyed how I put this slimline card together using this beautiful printed paper, as well as our Princess Dragon stamp set and our Meadow slimline die. All of my supplies I used are down in my description. I hope if you like this video, you'll click that like button, and if you're new, you'll subscribe. Have a wonderful day.